Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Moyo Talks. It's Wednesday evening, it's 8 o'clock, and tonight we have a really special guest with us this evening. His name is Eric Edmeades. I met Eric when I was in Tallinn a couple of years ago with Mind Valley. Eric is South African, and I'm really excited and looking forward to our interview with him tonight. Let me tell you a little bit more about Eric. Eric Edmeades is an internationally recognized business speaker, film producer, and serial entrepreneur. Eric's varied business background includes mobile computing, medical simulation, reality gaming, 3D camera engineering, and Hollywood special effects. Eric is also the founder of WildFit and the creator of both Inception Marketing and Business Freedom, a business owner methodology that empowers you to own a business that doesn't own you. Furthermore, Eric is an internationally recognized keynote speaker and author. When it comes to teaching people the art of public speaking, we can confidently say very few people are as qualified as Eric Edmeades. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, hi. Really good to be here. How are you?
Really good. Eric, we're really excited to have you with our mostly South African audience this evening. And because you were born here, I thought it would be great to have you and have a chat. Having done a number of courses with you, having done WildFit, I really think it would be wonderful if you shared your wisdom with our audience tonight. What we're going to do, the format tonight, everybody, is that we're going to, I'm going to do an interview with Eric. And then what I would love you to do is type in the chat box as we're doing that. And furthermore, what we will do is you can ask Eric some questions at the end if you wish to. So we look forward to that. You can post your questions in the Q&A and we will take those questions from you. So thank you, Eric. What is the weather like where you are?
I'm in the Caribbean and it's gorgeous and amazing and warm and quite a nice place to spend lockdown, I have to confess and admit.
Aha, wonderful. So, Eric, this serial entrepreneur, these amazing things that you've achieved in your life, how does the story go? Is there, I'm sure there are lots of stories, but in terms of the story of your career progression and where you've got to and how you've got to where you are now, how did it go?
Wow. I mean, how long do we have? It's, it's a weird combination of things. Of course, I was born in Pretoria and my dad was studying, I think, at Wits. And next thing you know, we were invited to go to Canada for him to study law. And it was really interesting because the next thing you know, I'm growing up in Canada in this completely different culture. And also with my mom and my dad, going to university and going through all the different things they're going through. And I really grew up with a really heavily socialist influence, not so much from my dad's side, but from my mom's side. Like she was a social worker, deep liberal. There was a lot of that, influence in my life. So it was always a bit weird that I wanted to like set up a lemonade stand over here, or I wanted to go shovel snow, and make money and rake leaves in the fall. And so I kind of had this, in a sense, atypical entrepreneurial spirit for what might appear to be my family life. And that kind of was catalyzed a little bit because when I finished high school, there were a number of challenges with the way schooling is done in Canada, but ultimately it was not possible for me to go to university. I couldn't afford to do it. My parents couldn't afford to send me, but weird quirk of the way education works there, I also wasn't eligible for funding. So I kind of was like, I can't really go to university. And at least not immediately. And so I just went to the workforce. I started looking at ads in the newspaper, and I remember I found this one job that sounded too good to be true. It was, but I went there for the interview and I got that job and I worked there for some years. And that taught me a lot about, I guess it expanded my sense of entrepreneurial awareness, rather than thinking like an employee, I started thinking like an entrepreneur. In fact, for many years, I pumped gas at a gas station, but I always sold more oil than the other guys. I always got tips. that's not a tipping culture in Canada. You don't tip the gas guy. Now it's all full service, automated service systems. But I always get all these tips. And it was just because I was gregarious and helpful and supportive and entrepreneurial in my approach. And you know, that spirit, I suppose, just caught me at one point. And there was a time in my life where I had an opportunity to start a business, and I decided to put those sort of young entrepreneurial ideas to practice in a real business world. And I would say that there was just as much luck as there might have been tenacity and some other things.
Wow. And so this kind of gave you the foundation and you've just built on that through the years and grown various businesses and sold them. And
well, you know, the first one, like anything you do the first time, you know, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was experimenting a lot. So my first business, when I still really distinctly remember sitting on the living room floor in my house in the west of England, and thinking to myself, like, I'm starting this business and I don't really know what I'm doing. I've never run a business before. I watched my previous employer build his business from a startup of, you know, 2.5 people to 100 some odd people. So I'd kind of seen it done, but frankly, I had very little respect for the way he had done it. So it's not like I had this role model of this ideal. You know, there were definitely some positive things to learn from him, but there was a lot of like warnings as well. And so when I started the business, I was reading a lot of business material at the time. I was reading a lot of stuff by Michael Gerber and Richard Branson and you know, and others. And so when I started the business, I made this decision. I think this one decision made all the difference. And that was, I recognized that there was a difference between self-employment and business ownership. And I recognized that I didn't want to be self-employed. I wanted to be a business owner. And I saw that distinction as being really important. Self-employed means I've gone out and I've created my own job, and there's nothing wrong with that. And no judgment about it. It's just not what I wanted. What I wanted to do was build an asset that I would be able to walk away from one day, that I'd be able to franchise it or sell it, or, you know, that I'd be able to step away and it would have equity and value. And making that decision, sitting on the floor on my living room, in my living room, that meant that every decision and every action I took over the next few years was filtered through that. I knew that that was the end goal.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because I think a lot of us that are entrepreneurs, I have an entrepreneur spirit myself. We kind of think we have to work 24/7, you know, work is really hard and we put in so much. And yet you're telling me you sold it on, you're living in the Caribbean, and yet you're running all these businesses. What's the magic, Eric?
You know, Cindy, it's kind of like this. I really did work hard when I started my business. I worked really, really hard, and I think it would be wrong to suggest that it's not like that. But I'll tell you what I also did is I took 12 to 14 weeks of vacation every year that I had that business for 9 years, every year. And of course, in Europe, the standard amount of vacation for an employee is 4 weeks or 5 weeks. In North America, Canada and America, it's only 2 weeks. But I was taking 12 to 14 weeks a year. And I'll tell you what I was doing with many of those weekends, just for fun, is one of my favorite things about living in the United Kingdom was that you could drive to Heathrow Airport, catch a flight at 7 o'clock at night. That flight would land at what was Jan Smuts at the time, you know, would land at Joburg International. And I would pick up a Combi, or no, I would pick up a Hilux, and I'd pick up a Hilux and I would drive to Bergendal, and I would go into the park for the weekend. I drive back to the airport and be home by Monday. And I could do this in 3 days because the flights were overnight. And so I would often go for 3, 4, 5 day trips or week-long trips. Like it was my passion to be doing wildlife photography and spending a lot of time in the wilderness. Now, what we have to remember is that these days when people talk about going on vacation from their business, they're not on vacation because they bring their business with them, right? And in my case, back then, you couldn't do that. There was no cell coverage in the Kruger National Park back then. When I disappeared, I was gone. And while that might sound irresponsible or difficult as a business owner, I'll put to you another way, that in order for somebody to get what we call business freedom, there are 2 addictions that have to be broken. The one addiction is your business's addiction to you. In other words, the business has to learn to do stuff without you, and it can't do that if you keep doing the stuff. So if you learn to let the business do stuff, then the business can grow and the business can organically begin to have a life of its own. But that means you have to break the second addiction, and that is your addiction to the business. And that was the other problem for me, is it's like, I liked doing it. I liked fixing this and doing that and so on. So by turning to my other passions, by turning to business mentoring passions that I had and wildlife photography, conservation, and spending time away, it allowed me to break my personal addiction to the business, and it allowed the business to break its addiction to me, and it forced the business to grow. Now, don't get me wrong, it was difficult. Mistakes were made, but you know the old classic thing, experience, experience is what's needed to have good judgment. There's no question about it. But where does experience come from? Bad judgment. Well, if we don't let our employees exercise any bad judgment, they're not going to have any experience. And so those breaks away from the business were a very crucial part toward building a business that didn't need me to be there.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I'd like to come in. Life has kind of changed over the last 6 months, and I think it's really important that we start talking about what are we doing differently, how are we doing things differently, and I think if we look first at business, and what have been some of your biggest challenges around your businesses. Life changed 6 months ago. March came, and we're 6 months down the line. How did you deal with that? How did you approach that?
Well, you might recall, I'm not sure if you've seen this in one of our workshops, but in our business freedom experience and other business freedom programs, we teach something called iceberg spotting. And iceberg spotting works like this. It's basically, the metaphor is, as a business owner, very often the business owner is stuck in the galley or stuck in the engine room, or working somewhere on the ship, instead of standing on the deck, looking out at the horizon, spotting opportunities and threats. And that's one of the most important jobs of the entrepreneur, or one of the most important jobs of the business. If the entrepreneur is not going to do it, somebody has to. And so I first observed this as a kid of about 17 or 18 years old, when CDs came out. I just watched CDs obliterate the record album business. And I remember thinking at 18, here I am entering the workforce, and I just watched an industry disappear. Like, forget job security. It doesn't even exist anymore, because one technological change can take out an industry. That's an iceberg. And so in my case, I do that kind of analysis all the time. And so some years ago, we started doing iceberg analyses on what we're doing right now. And one of the things we determined was, well, wait a minute now, what would happen? What would we do if something like 9/11 happened again? Because at the time that 9/11 happened, I was a business consultant flying around the world on planes, and all of a sudden I couldn't fly on planes anymore. And my business was disrupted. And then even once they started flying again, I didn't want to fly, like a lot of people. And so I took a look and said, wow, what would happen if that happened to us again now, considering that, the vast majority of our business involves me being on a plane to go somewhere to teach or to share or to host a retreat or something like that, or people to come to me on a plane and do that here in the Caribbean. And so we, about 5-6 years ago, started digitizing a lot of our programs and brought a lot of our programs online, so that, and we're at the point now where far more people go through our business freedom trainings or our wildfit trainings through digital interface than they do with me personally. So what that meant is that by the time COVID came, we were already 50% digital, which meant that didn't need to be disrupted for logistical reasons. But then, because I am paying attention to icebergs and stuff, in February, when all this stuff started happening, I was a little bit more hysterical about it than other people. I don't know if you remember what it was like back in February, but if you were the kind of person who was afraid of the virus, you were hysterical, and everybody else was like, you're just hysterical. But then as the weeks went on, us hysterical people ended up looking not so hysterical after all. Well, I was one of them. And I'll give you an example I've shared before, is that we had a big webinar coming up speaking about public speaking. And we were using that webinar to promote one of our live public speaking programs. And I looked at this, that program's never going to happen. Like, it's in June. And with what I see happening now here in February, I don't believe that program's going to happen. I think we're going to have major travel disruptions. I think people won't want to buy. There's going to be economic disruptions. And I went to my team and I said, I don't think we should do this. And this is like 2 days before the webinar. Like, we can't change the webinar 2 days before. We've already sold tickets. Like, you're being alarmist. And after we talked a little bit about it, they realized maybe I wasn't being alarmist, and that sometimes playing it safe is a good idea. And we rejigged the webinar, and we brought one of the products that we were getting ready to launch in 2021, and we brought it forward, and we launched it at that webinar. And we sold out in 4 days. 100 places gone in 4 days. We had to put on a second class. It sold out. And so we went from a significant loss around these live events that we were having to cancel and what have you, to suddenly launching entirely new programs online at lower price points for our clients than live, because I don't have to fly everywhere and we don't have to rent a venue and all that stuff, but also at a much higher margin for us because there are all these other expenses that we don't have. And so we ended up doing quite well in those months. Now, we're working hard, and it'll be interesting to see how the next several months and years go. But I think that there are two steps that I really recommend everybody take a look at when they go through difficult times like this. The one is to look inside the business for hidden resources, hidden talents, hidden skills, hidden products or services that they don't normally think of. And in our case, one of those things was course design. We're very good at course design. Our courses are among the highest rated wherever they go. Like, we're very lucky that way. But we've always seen that as an internal asset. But all of a sudden, as we looked out into the world and did step two, and that is ask what people need, how can we serve? When we saw how we could serve, there were all these people that had knowledge that couldn't go to work anymore, that wanted to figure out how to get their knowledge to the people who needed it. Like, there was this one woman who had this awesome way of training, of toilet training babies before they're 3 months old. It's just incredible. And so, like, there are people like that with these interesting ideas. And so we launched a product creation bootcamp where we taught people our secrets for creating digital products. Wildly successful program, incredibly helpful to the people externally. So 2 steps. 1, look at the hidden talents and skills inside you, inside your business. And 2, ask yourself how you can serve better. And if you can find a match between those things, you've got a winner.
Wow. Well, I actually did the course creation and it was great. And we're looking to launch our first online. I mean, we have a number of online platforms, and we also turned the work that we were doing live into online courses. So for us, it's also been a huge growing. I mean, it was, and we'll tell the story of Moyo the week before lockdown, where we normally have a live audience of about 40 people, and we just went, we're going to stream. And we had been so scared to stream our weekly talks. And all of a sudden, it was amazing how that adrenaline just made one think outside the box.
Yeah.
Eric, one of the reasons I've followed you for a number of years and whatever is the way that you observe our species, and how you've looked at the food industry, you've looked at the business industry. Where do you think our species is going right now? Do you think we've learned anything in the last 6 months? Huh?
You don't want me to answer that.
No, I would love one of your really honest answers without swearing. But are we learning?
I wasn't going to do that. Cindy. All right.
You can swear if you like. You can swear.
Let's go back. Let's go back for a minute to the National Museum in Bloemfontein. And in the National Museum in Bloemfontein, there's a skull, and it's my grandfather's skull. I don't mean from his own head. It's one he found as an archaeologist, and it's a early Homo sapiens skull, 259,000 years old. Just put that in perspective. We think the Egyptian pyramids are ancient at 3,000 to 5,000 years old, and this skull is 250,000 years old. So as a child holding a cast of that skull in my hand, I asked myself what I thought life was like back then. How did this guy live? How did he die? Like, I want to know everything. And so I've been really curious from that point. Now, the reason I say this to you is that if you want to understand where we're going, I think you have to start off with where we came from. And where we came from was an incredibly lush planet that was full of biodiversity and an incredible variety of animals from large to small. And about, let's say 2 or 3 million years ago, we started having an impact on the environment. We started overhunting, and our population started to grow. We had a type of evolution that had never seen before, and that was the evolution of ideas. Before that, evolution was this lockstep process where one plant or animal would mutate slightly to gain advantage over the next one, and 8,000 years, the next one would respond with a counter move with some other mutation. And it was an incredibly slow process. But all of a sudden, humans could have an idea and pass it from one clan to another in the same generation, and then they could pass it to the next generation. And so we had this incredibly fast evolution of ideas. And many of those ideas initially were about how to hunt better. And so what did we do? We pushed giant tortoises off into extinction. We wiped out almost all of the what were there, 11 or 12 elephant species in Africa, and now there's only 2. We basically obliterated the megafauna of that country, of that continent. And then as our ancestors spread out of Africa, they did an even more devastating job of every other continent, because at least the animals in Africa had evolved with us. So Loxodonta africana is an incredibly intelligent animal that really understands humans. Whereas a mammoth in North America didn't even know what a human was. And so it didn't know to run. And so we devastated all of those continents. We wiped out all those. And then we started with agriculture, and we started. Why I'm saying all this, and it sounds pretty dire, is that it really is a little bit dire. But, you know, my father just recently published an article in Quillette, and he makes such an interesting point, something he and I have been talking about for a lot of years. And that is that, you know, the very thing that has driven us to become the most destructive force on our planet can be the very thing that saves us. And that is that we are able to think, and we are able to pass on creativity. So, you know, the way my dad puts it in the article, it's so gorgeous. He talks about this, I think it's a surfer who was attacked by a shark and ended up with like all these stitches and cuts right down to the bone, managed to survive, get out of the water, and then spend the rest of his life campaigning for mercy for sharks. Now, can you imagine a baboon getting attacked by a leopard and campaigning for the safety of leopards? No, that baboon's going to try and kill that leopard. We can transcend that. We can transcend this different level of consciousness where we actually start to really, truly take care of our environment. It means electing different people. It means buying different products. It means supporting different companies. But if you want to know where I think humans are headed, is we're at a fork in the road, and one fork in the road is really not good for our species, and the other fork in the road is good for our planet and our species. And I just hope that enough of us pass on good ideas for the next generation and next, so that we begin shifting in that direction where we are taking care of this thin blue layer that we live on our spaceship.
Mm-hmm. And as individuals, what would be your advice to us to help swing it the right way, where we start taking care of our, you know, that we're creating a better place for our children, you know?
Yeah. You know, I think that's a very big conversation. I don't want to pretend to be the glowing example of how to make it better. I fly too often, and you know, there's environmental damage of that. And, you know, we all need to look at our own lives and figure out, I think, two things. What can we do in our immediate circle of influence? So, for example, stop buying water in plastic bottles. Don't use cleansers with microbeads in them, and stop having parties with glitter. Like, these things go off into the environment and clog the world up. You know, we're now at a place where there's barely a cubic centimeter of ocean that doesn't have some microplastics floating around in it. I saw this horrible video of the Midway Islands, where these wildlife photographers and videographers were there looking at all the natural birds that live there, and they found a bird lying on the ground. And of course, the bird was long since decomposed, but because there's no ground predators, the skeleton was in perfect shape. But then what they could see is there was a perfect line of weird colors from the gullet through to the anus, and it was just plastic. The entire bird's digestive system was clogged up with plastic. And that's one of the most remote islands in the world. And of course, the birds are migratory, and they're flying around, and they're picking up the plastic that we're throwing in the ocean. So I think we have to look at that. We have to take a look at using cars that are more fuel efficient, or even not using fuel at all, like electric cars that are becoming obviously much more prolific. Thank you to another incredible South African that I'm a big fan of. And so I think that on a personal level, we can do that. What is our sphere of influence? For some of us, it just means changing our shopping patterns and that sort of thing. And for other of us, like somebody like Elon Musk, it's like, no, forget it. We're going to change the world. And we all have to figure out what our sphere of influence is. But then there's the next level. And that is recognizing that your behaviors influence, you know, ultimately the cleanest form of democracy in the world is what you spend your money on. When you buy something, you reward the company for doing that thing. So if you have a company that makes water in plastic bottles versus, say, water in glass bottles, buy the glass, even if it's more expensive. Reward the company for doing the right thing. And if you reward companies for doing the right thing, they'll do more of the right thing. Look, Kellogg's. I happen to think that Kellogg's is just as bad as any tobacco company. I think that their food products are absolutely disgusting. Their manipulative ad campaigns for children are terrible. I think they're evil, except, you know what? I don't think there's any one single person at Kellogg's that's evil. And I think that if they started seeing us not want to buy garbage, if they started seeing us buying healthier and healthier things, Kellogg's would make healthier and healthier things. And so I think even Coca-Cola, my least favorite company maybe in the world, devastated my health as a child. And I think that they, as a company, they're pretty evil. But you know what? They've seen the trend toward coconut water. They've seen the trend toward that stuff. So they started investing in that area. And so we vote with our dollars, with our rands, with our pounds, even with our rubles. We get out there and we make an impact by what we spend on. And then lastly, talking of democracy, vote. Get out and vote. Don't write off democracy. There is a reason that the planet is the way it is at the moment, and it has everything to do with who is in power. And who is in power right now is largely people that are represented by large corporate interests. And the only way we can deal with that is by voting them out. And so it's time for us to start electing leaders that care about the environment, that are not going to sacrifice the environment for short-term economic gain.
Oh, thank you. That is really, really good. You know, in South Africa, we deal with quite a social, our social, there's a, the rich are, it seems like at a time like that the rich are getting richer and the poor are having more children, and the haves and the have-nots. And I think through this pandemic, this is really highlighted, certainly in our country, and I'm sure in other countries, that the same thing is happening. And then on the other hand, there are entrepreneurs and businesses and a lot of the online material that is really focused around having money, making money. And you said earlier that your mother, I wasn't aware, came from a very social background. How do you think we can balance that? Have you got any words of wisdom around the balance of how we negate our businesses, how we sort that out? Because I think the question I'm asking is, how do we teach people to fish? But I'll hand that to you.
So I feel like the idea of left and right is becoming more and more difficult to quantify in politics anymore. The left has become so extreme that it's met the right around the backside, and I can't even tell anymore. The very same people that are up in arms supporting Bernie Sanders are very much, as far as I can tell, like the people that are on the other side supporting Donald Trump in many cases. We're at this place where politics is no longer this clean left-right kind of exchange of ideas. It's now a very messy map. And so I want to suggest that the idea of capitalism and socialism being on different ends of that political spectrum may, strictly speaking, be correct, but I don't think it's how we ever should have been looking at it. I think we should have been looking at them as stages of development. You see, in order for, in my opinion, and I'm no economist, this is just, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a guy, I just have my own opinions, that's it. And all I can say is this: in my opinion, a society cannot afford to become socialist until they can afford to become socialist. And so we can all hold up Norway as this phenomenal example of socialism that works. But you know what? They have billions of dollars worth of oil under the sea. It's not a fair economy. It's not a reasonable assessment. You can't say, oh, well, look, socialism works. Yeah, socialism works when you've got billions of barrels of oil underneath you. And if you liquidate Norway, everybody in Norway is a millionaire. And incidentally, we often make these false comparisons. We try to compare Sweden's brand of socialism with America's brand of capitalism, and we think that that's a fair comparison. It's not. It's not even remotely. They're completely different countries with completely different realities. So what I want to suggest is, I think that there's a spectrum, and at the very earliest version of that spectrum, there's survival, and survival it starts off as a very capitalistic thing. I get to eat what I hunt. I hunted, I get to eat it. I hunted, I get to feed it to my family. That's capitalism. It's me doing my thing. I'm responsible for myself. And then there comes a point in the village where we start going, gosh, I'm not that good at making arrows, but I sure can shoot them. And so then I go to you and go, hey, maybe your husband can make me an arrow. Because, in the Bushman tribes, it's the men that do that work. I don't mean to be sexist. I'm just talking about the way things are. And so I go, okay, maybe he can make the arrow or the bows. And then I'll do the hunting. Now we've got to figure out an exchange of value. So, okay, well, when I go hunting, then I get this much meat and I agree to give this much meat for that arrow. Okay, this is capitalism. This is working. It starts that way. But there's eventually going to come a point where somebody's sick for a while. And the question is, do we give them meat when they're not contributing? And that's the beginning of socialism. And you see, what I'm trying to get at is, in our world today, we need to move toward, in my opinion, a more socialist view of the way things are being done right now, because pure capitalism, I can tell you right now, if you want to know why everybody's sick from COVID, it's capitalism. I know that's a big statement to make, but I'll put it to you this way. The food industry has so terribly devastated our food regulations, our food legislation, and our food production that the vast majority of people are dealing with serious metabolic diseases. There's prolific type 2 diabetes, obesity, and I don't even think COVID would have been able to get purchase in our population if so many of us weren't sick in the first place. The CDC says that less than 6% of the people that have succumbed to the disease were sick. So imagine that. Imagine changing the numbers dramatically. But why is it like that? Well, because it's profitable to sell us sugar. It's profitable to get us to eat more than we need to eat. In order to get us to eat more than we need to eat, you need to make junk food. Because if you're eating nutritious food, you don't eat more than you need to eat. And so, and then if we want to go a little further, what about pharmaceutical companies? Let's not pretend they're in it for us. The guy who invented insulin, that the concept of exogenous insulin that they extracted initially from, I think, pigs and dogs' livers, the idea that you could govern your sugar intake with insulin, the guy who came up with that idea, he came up with another idea too, and that was a low-fat diet, much like another fabulous South African, Timothy Noakes. This guy comes along with this idea and says, no, we don't have to have diabetes. We can cure it, or we can treat it, not cure it. We can treat it with this here drug, or we could change it with lifestyle. He came up with that in the late 1800s. Which one caught on? The one that makes money. And so I think it is absolutely imperative to us that we use the phenomenal success that capitalism has helped us to create, and we start bringing more socialist thinking to the way that happens, and more regulation of things like the food industry, more regulation of the pharmaceutical industry, and so on. Look, and I think it's going to be difficult because workforce automation is going to come in. All these robots are going to come. It's already happening. Robots are coming in and people are losing jobs. Well, of course, democracy means that the people who are going to lose their jobs, who are in the majority in many places, are going to be able to use their majority vote to stop the progress that might eventually lead to the kind of corporate responsibility and government socialism that might make this all work. And we're going to have to get all through that. It's going to take revolutions, hopefully nonviolent ones, but it's going to take some serious thinking and real effort, and it's going to take a lot of open-mindedness.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you really get the feeling that this COVID has given us a big shake. It just feels like we've had a big shake, and we're now doing that. I want to ask another thing. You spoke a little bit about the food industry. Eric, I call it the lockdown belly. A whole lot of people over lockdown and having done WildFit and pretty much live WildFit. Do you want to just talk to people a little bit about what happened around their food during lockdown, and maybe some of the things that they need to look at to come out of lockdown belly?
Yeah, it has a few lockdown belly. It's also called pandemic pounds, and the COVID-19. The COVID-15, the 15 pounds or kilos that people put on during the time. So I think in order to look at that, we need to look before that. We need to look at what was wrong with the westernized or say industrialized nation food supply system in the first place. There was a problem. And the problem is that we don't really understand food. And I really believe that problem stems from something that I call the battle of the plate. And the battle of the plate was nothing that you were fighting with your plate or I was fighting with my plate. It was the battle that the food industry was fighting over your plate. The dairy people were fighting for how much room on the plate they could have. And the wheat people were fighting for their part of the plate. It was like a giant game of Risk. They're all trying to, and the way they did it is they'd go and commission studies that would absolutely convince you that their food was imperative to human existence and health. But then they would equally go and commission studies that would blame the other food for disease. And so one day you see a study that says bread is good for you. And the next day you see one that's bad for you. And then fat is good. And then fat is bad. And salt is good. And salt is bad. And so we're all confused. And most of us don't really have any idea what we should be eating. And so let's start with this. It was actually the Kruger National Park that woke me up to this idea, because I was on my way to Kruger. I was on a plane. I was flying to Kruger. And I was reading an article about captive elephants in zoos and circuses. And in the article, they talked about the fact that elephants would only live 7 to 10 years in zoos and circuses back in the late 1800s. But when they discovered that elephants could really live like 70, 80 years, they wanted to figure out why were they only living 10? We could get a better return on an investment. And so in the article, they started talking about the difference between the elephant's wild diet and the elephant's captive diet. And that irritated me because the elephants don't have a wild diet. They have an elephant diet. Like that's what they have. They don't have a wild diet. They have an elephant diet. Now they may well have a captive diet. That's a different thing. That's being put on an artificial diet and it was killing them. But the elephant diet is not the wild elephant diet. It's the elephant diet. And just like elephants have a diet, so do cheetahs. Elephants eat 200 kilograms of bark and grass and seasonal fruits. They drink 70 liters of water. A cheetah running its way through the low veld, it wants to eat 2.5 kilograms of fresh meat. They won't eat carrion the way that hyenas will. Or a leaf cutter ant doesn't eat leaves, funny enough. It cuts up leaves and farms them. It's an agriculturalist. So every species on Earth has a diet. And I put to you that I think the same is true with humans. And not that there aren't some differences, subtle differences between us, but I would argue that, you know, there are 13 essential vitamins and 16 essential minerals, I think. And, you know, there are 20 amino acids, 9 of which we have to eat because we don't make them. And you know what? I don't think there's any human on Earth that doesn't need all those things. We all need those things. And the food industry is not giving us those things. And they are leading us toward disease. In the 1970s, almost nobody in America had type 2 diabetes. And today you're talking about 1 in 3 Americans is dealing with diabetes or prediabetes. By the way, that results in over $20 billion in pharmaceutical sales in the space of 30, 40 years. That's the growth they've had. So what does that mean? It means we started COVID in trouble before it even came along. And so now you take somebody who was just eking a few pounds on every year, just a little bit, just 2, 3 pounds, not a big deal. But then COVID comes along and all of a sudden they're dealing with all kinds of stress. They're dealing, and the news is freaking them out. The media is doing everything they can to scare them. Their family's stressed out. So they start producing more cortisol. And when you produce cortisol, you can't release weight. In fact, you become even better at gaining weight because your body gets this message. Oh my God, things are not safe. I'd better store energy and water. And so people go into COVID with already many times a terrible diet. And then they add to that stress and they wonder why the weight, and then, but in many countries, they weren't even allowed to go outside. They couldn't even go get exercise. So like suddenly they're moving less, eating more, stressed more, and the pandemic pounds are piling on. And so that's, you know, that's what's going on. But I think what we really need to wake up to is that it is absolutely clear at this point. Now, I want to say something carefully here. Lifestyle diseases. I think it's one of the most disgusting phrases ever. It's a really, really manipulative and evil phrase that was come up with, as far as I can tell, by the food industry or potentially the government, because the idea behind lifestyle disease is to say it's your fault. Oh, look, you're fat. It's your fault. Oh, you're type 2 diabetes. You have a lifestyle disease. You have a bad lifestyle. And while we do have to take some personal responsibility for what's going on for us, it is absolutely disgusting not to acknowledge the role that the food industry has played in creating those devastating lifestyles and perpetuating them. It's the soft drink industry that came up with the idea that you can go and exercise your fat away. You can exercise your calories away. It's absolutely wrong. And now Boris Johnson's cycling his fat and telling everybody to take up biking instead of changing the relationship with sugar. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is that we can use COVID right now on a personal basis to really transform our health. I am in the best shape of my life today after the lockdown. I am. I worked out. I ate well. I said, I want my immune system to be in. If I have to encounter this virus, I want to be in the best possible shape that I can be in. And so I did. And so I, you know, and what I'm saying is now people can take control and turn that around because first of all, COVID's not going anywhere for a while. And secondly, it's not gonna be the last time this happens. And so I think it's really important now for people to devote, you know, like most people, Cindy, most people put more thought into what phone they're going to buy than what they eat in a year. If you think about it from an, you know, they go, the phone, I want to know what the RAM is. I want to know what the processing chip is. What kind of camera does it have? How many pixels? But they never ask themselves, is there vitamin C in liver? They don't know these things. And so it's time for us to take a class in nutrition, a really good one, and a class in food psychology and break free of the food industry and reattain the health that is our birthright.
Eric, I'd be interested to know, have you been in touch with Hudson But, Bushman and how they've dealt with the pandemic?
Yeah, I haven't been in touch with them directly because they don't have technology, but I was with them about a month before the lockdown. I was in Tanzania with them for 2 weeks just before the lockdown. And then I've been checking in with them. In fact, I just checked in with them yesterday. And they're doing fine. As far as I know, none of them have encountered COVID. Of course, with the slowdown of tourism and stuff, they haven't had people traveling out deep into the bush. I imagine that COVID could either have been quite devastating to them because they don't encounter the same levels of other coronaviruses, colds and flus that we do. But on the other side, they have about the best metabolic health you could imagine. So maybe they wouldn't even have noticed if they had it. We don't know. But they're doing well, and I got the message yesterday that they're looking forward to me coming back. So I'm hoping to be able to do that next year.
And Eric, the new unusual. I'm one of the things that I like to call what's happening now is the new unusual, because I think we need to do that. Do you think we will travel again like we did, or do you think it will be, do you think we'll have live conferences again? Do you think we'll meet in Tallinn in a couple of years or next year for Mind Valley?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, we've had the Spanish flu. This kind of thing there was the Black Plague several times. It's just a matter of time, I gather, and I figure. I think what's particularly difficult about this virus is that it's actually, in my opinion, and look, the numbers will bear this out in time, and I'm no epidemiologist and I'm not a doctor. I just have my opinion based on the work that I do and the anecdotal evidence that I've seen so far. But I frankly feel like COVID-19 is a pretty feckless, pretty weak virus that really only can be this devastating when it approaches a population that's already sick. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that for the vast majority of us, it's not even dangerous. I think something like 48 to 54% of people that have tested positive or didn't even know they had it, like they didn't even have symptoms. And I've had a number of our clients come on live calls through WildFit and tell us that they've had it. I've not many, maybe 6 or 7 have said I had COVID-19 and it was not much more than a flu or a cold. One of them lost their sense of taste and smell, but that was it. And then it came back, so for the vast majority of us, this fire, if we take care of our health, this virus really is not that dangerous. And I think what that does kind of mean in the end is that, maybe once there's a vaccine that's out and, that's a whole nother debate from people about whether they can trust vaccines. I'll tell you what, I will never be one of the first people to take a vaccine, and I'm not anti-vax. I am on a case-by-case basis, vax skeptical. So I, for example, don't take flu vaccinations, never have, no intention to do that. But I am very glad that I had my, smallpox vaccinations as a kid in South Africa, because God knows that was a problem at that stage. And so here we are with this one. Well, my current opinion is that if you are metabolically healthy, if you're fundamentally healthy, then you may not need, to take that precaution. And then somebody immediately is going to come back and go, well, yeah, but that's just socially irresponsible. You could still be a carrier. And I'm like, well, that's true. But drinking that Coke makes you a much more dangerous carrier. And so I think we're at a point now where we're going to begin to realize that people's health and the relationship with food is a matter of social responsibility. It's no longer just a matter of personal responsibility.
Well, I think you have to start the revolution, or you've already started the revolution.
I'm working on it.
You're working on it. Great. So I'd like to open up the Q&As to the audience. So have we got some questions? So from Mark, we have, as an entrepreneur, how do you see capitalism changing in the next decade? Well, I don't want to pretend that I'm any kind of futurist. I have some opinions, and some of them I've sort of addressed with what we talked about before. I think that let me tell you in terms of what I'd like to see. I'm not, depending on how much sleep I had the night before, I have a rather more optimistic or pessimistic view of the future. So it's tough to say sometimes. But what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see a move toward a more conscious form of capitalism. For example, somebody has a factory and they want to bring robots in, and the robots can replace, and Cindy, I don't mean traffic lights, I mean actual robots. Little South Africa humor for you. But but they're going to bring robots in, and so what I would like to see is that the government and the unions and the company figure out a way that those robots can come in and can replace all those jobs,
but can also, as a consequence of that, generate tax revenue that can give those people a basic living wage so that they can go and pursue their dreams, doing whatever it is they want. And I believe that that's possible. I believe that the next conscious evolution of our capitalism will not require that everybody works. I don't think it'll be necessary. I think that technology is getting so fast and so cheap and so efficient. We're going to have robots. We probably already, I mean, sure we do have robots that are building robots. And so, we're going to be at a place where workforce automation is going to take a lot of the jobs out of the way. They're not going to be needed anymore. And so what, are we going to cast those people aside and leave them on the street? No, we're going to have to come up with a form of conscious capitalism that basically says, all right, you want to put this robot in, it's going to replace like 5 salaries, but it's going to cost you a lot up front. So what we're going to do is create a taxation model where every year that that robot is operating, you're going to pay this much tax. It's not an income tax, it's a productivity tax. And that tax is going to be used to create a basic living wage for the jobs that were replaced by that thing, or potentially those employees will end up becoming, in a sense, employees of the company without having to work. It's like part of the retirement package is you worked here and now we replaced you with a robot and we'll take care of you through retirement for life now. And then now you're going to have people going, oh, can we have a new renaissance? Like suddenly there's going to be people with a ton of spare time. And my hope is they won't spend that time on Netflix and Xbox. My hope is that they'll paint, and that they'll compose incredible music, and that they'll invent new technologies, and that they'll do incredible social projects. And so that's my hope for capitalism going forward, at least in one example.
Excellent. Sorry, so Lawrence has posted a question in the chat box saying, how did you manage your business while taking holidays in South Africa? We have fraud and theft.
Well, I really do want to say that it is different culturally in different places. I am well aware that if I was running a restaurant, for me to take, those kind of weeks away could have been quite scary, because it's a cash business and restaurants and bars are notorious for skimming and that kind of stuff around. And I'm aware that some of those things exist in the culture in South Africa, as we see here in the Dominican Republic. Whenever you have major value disparity, whenever you have incredible health, wealth, and incredible poverty, those things are possible. I want to say the first thing is that we really do have to take responsibility for those things. In other words, I don't want to leave a $50 bill lying here on my desk when I've got, when I have a nanny that works here, and that's like, $50 to me is so different to her. Why would I want to put her in that situation to create that temptation for her? So obviously we want to deal with those cultural things. But then the other thing is this: for the most part, my experience has been, and I've had businesses, I have had businesses in South Africa. I've had businesses in here in the Dominican Republic. In America, I've consulted businesses in over 20 countries around the world. And one thing that I have found is that people are far more inclined to steal from a business that they feel isn't actually serving them in some way, that isn't really taking good care of them. And so the first thing that I would want in any business that I'm building is a real sense of family, and a real sense that we care. And when you do that, like, I'll give you a crazy example where it went a little too far. I had this couple that was working for me, and they had, the father had a son with another woman, and they divorced, and now the father and mother were living with the son. The mother had just one day sent the son and said, "You take him." And so now they've got the son, Dwayne, and he's such a great kid. They were low income. They'd been long-term unemployed before they came to work for me. Then they came to work for me, and Dwayne used to come by after school because they couldn't afford childcare. So he'd come by, and I'd let him play in the warehouse and hang out. I was violating probably a million British safety standards, but what the hell, it was fun. And so then one day I got a call on a Saturday morning, and it was the mother, and she was calling the stepmother, and she was calling me saying the police are here and they want to take Dwayne back up to the north of England. And I was, why? And they go, the mother called and said that they should. And I said, okay, do me a favor, don't let them in the house right now, and let them know that you've got an advocate coming who's going to just come over right away. And I got in my car. This is Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. I drove in my car, drove to their council estate place, parked outside right behind the police car, walked up, 2 constables standing on the step. "Excuse me, gentlemen," make my way in, close the door, go inside, talk to them. They tell me what's been going on. And, they're terrified. Like when I told her, don't let the police in, she's like, can I even do that? right? Because, you know, at that socioeconomic level, what education does she have, right? What does she know about her rights? And so I said, of course you can. Unless they had a warrant of some kind, they can't just come barging into your house. And she goes, oh, okay, I'm terrified. And then they said what happened was that the police just showed up and said they wanted to take Dwayne. So I said, okay, hold on. And I opened the door, closed it behind me, and went out to the screen door so they could hear me. And I said to the constable, I said, what can you tell me what's going on here? I'm their employer. I'm not a lawyer or anything. They're just afraid. I hope you can understand that. Police on the doorstep, 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I just want to try and make sure everything goes according to plan here. So what is the plan? And the policeman says, well, we got a complaint from the mother and she wants the child back. And I said, okay. I said, do you have like a child protection order or anything? No. Do you have a warrant of some kind? No. Do you have any paperwork at all that would permit you to take the child? No. So would it even be lawful for the child to go with you right now? No. Okay. So isn't it true that what you really want is to make sure that the child is happy and healthy and stuff, right? Would that make you guys feel good? Yeah. I go, okay, come on in. I open the door. The constables come in. We make them a cup of tea. They talk with Dwayne and they leave. Now, what does that do for Karen? Do you think Karen's ever going to steal from me? Never. She's never going to do that because I've got her back. In fact, she was giving a tour to a new employee one day, and this is where it went a little too far. She was giving a tour to a new employee, and they're walking through the back area, and you know, here's where the safety eye wash is, here's the toilets, here's the fax machine, you know, all the stuff. And then they come around the corner, and the woman, and she gets into this like the back exit area where there's no witnesses, and she turns to the new employee and she goes, "If you ever hurt Eric, I'll kill you." So the loyalty went a little too far. But my point is that in order to leave your business from any country for that kind of time, you're going to definitely need to have a really strong sense of employee loyalty. And you're going to have really good managers around that make sure that culture is maintained. And I acknowledge there are some industries or businesses where that might not be practical.
Great. We've got a food question from Madeleine. Can Eric explain on the comment about insulin and the low calorie, high fat diet? Is he saying that the latter is good treatment for diabetes?
Okay. So Madeleine, I am not a doctor. My grandfather, Gumi Dutoy, he was a surgeon. You know, my uncle, Helium Dutoy, surgeon. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to answer it from a medical perspective. I'm going to give you an opinion, and then I'm going to refer you to a doctor that I think you probably should pay attention to as you are in South Africa. There is a professor in South Africa. His name is Professor Timothy Noakes, and he is genius and he's brilliant. And I really respect both his thinking and his model of communication. He's a great guy. I hope I get to meet him. If any of you know him, hook me up, because I want to come to South Africa and I want to meet him. But what I will tell you in the meantime is that in my belief, we would be best served to live as close as we could to our original evolutionary heritage. And that means that we should live as close to the way our ancestors did as we can. And I don't mean like my great grandmother, in a wagon train as a voortrekker. I don't mean that ancestor. I mean the ancestors like all the way back. I'm talking about the guys that lived in the caves in Robert. That's what I'm talking about. And what we know about those people is that they had long periods of time where they didn't eat heavy carbohydrates because they weren't available. Like, you know, fruit's not on the trees all season round. Root vegetables aren't around all the time. But what is around all the time is seafood and meat from hunting and eggs and that kind of stuff. So I happen to believe that what we call wild fit spring, or the low carb, not low calorie, low carb, high fat, I believe that wild fit spring, or that low carb world, is an incredibly healthy season that people should go through. And it has been my experience that it is very useful in helping people recover from type 2 diabetes. And Tim Noakes can tell you so much more about that right there in South Africa.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And yeah, I think we do know Tim really well and the food revolution that he did. We have another question from Kathy. Where do you see the future of South Africa business as a third world country versus the rest of the world?
So this is a bit of a sensitive topic. And I want to tell you about a speech that I gave in Johannesburg about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. It was before Mandela had passed away. And and let me just go back for a minute. My last name sounds very English. It is actually English, but the truth is I'm only 1/16 English. The rest of me is like proper Boer Dutch background, van Wyk, de Toy. Like my family's been in the country from wagon train days. And so I love South Africa. I have a deep passion for it. I often feel more African than I do Canadian, despite growing up in Canada. And so, of course, I've been paying attention to South Africa from a young age. I actually met as a child Donald Woods. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Donald Woods, he was the reporter who was working with Steve Biko to get his story out. And I got to meet him one day as a boy. And South Africa has I'm saying all this because I want to share an opinion that might not be so popular. And I apologize if it's triggering for anybody. But when Mandela gave his famous forgiveness speech, it was one of the most important things he could do. And not only did he give that speech, but he lived that life. He lived the life of forgiveness, not firing the existing white bureaucrats in government when he first got in, and they all assumed that he would, and he didn't. And we've seen that pattern in other countries in the past, where just fire all the colonials, get rid of it. And he really practiced what he preached about the concept of forgiveness. And I would suggest it's possible that one speech, every now and again, there's like this one speech that can change the world, like Winston Churchill, we will never surrender, right? Like every now and again, there's one speech that can change destiny. And I think that speech that Mandela gave was one of them. And it may have averted civil war, or at least a subversive, or at least some form of civil action like that. And what I said in this talk in Johannesburg all these years ago is that I would hope that Mandela would give one more speech. And as he was advancing in years, and I said, there's one more speech I'd like him to give. And it's a new speech, and it's called Gratitude. And it's gratitude because in as much as terrible things were done in the bad years, terrible things were done on both sides. And I would say that clearly, if you're going to say that one side is more guilty than the other, it's got to be the oppressor. It's got to be the person who started it. It's got to be the white government that was in charge at that point. That doesn't change the fact that bad things were done on both sides. Now, one of the challenges is that when you talk only about forgiveness, then you immediately start talking about reparations and redistribution of wealth and disruption and taking farms and ranches. And it's a scary path to go down. But one of the things that I believe is that had South Africa ended apartheid 20 years earlier, South Africa may well today look like Zimbabwe. And so what I want to do is I want to say, and I'm not the right guy to say it, I'm a white man who left South Africa, so I'm totally the wrong person to say it. But what I said in that talk in Johannesburg that day is that I would like for Mandela to stand up and say, you know what? Yes, we wanted this struggle to end earlier. Yes, we wanted equality earlier. And you know what? Those things didn't happen. And we can dwell on that and we can blame about that. But the other thing we can recognize is that we have infrastructure. We have roads that work. We have power systems that, while are being strained and so forth as we move forward here, are much better than they would have been otherwise. We have water supply systems. We have a national parks board that runs, there's structure here. And now we have a country that we can build. And South Africa, in my opinion, has the ability to be and when I say this, I mean the old America as far as I'm concerned, but it could be still the United States of Europe, the United States, the way United States used to be we'll come along and help at the end of World War II and World War I. And it was a country that really stood up for freedom and justice and all this stuff. And I think South Africa has the ability to be that leader on the continent of Africa in every possible way. And partly it has that ability because it has a lot of that infrastructure. And so if we can all start to be if we can really become us and it's one of the things I really would hope that COVID would do for us is look, a common enemy. It turns out all Homo sapiens should be on this battle together. And I think that if we can do that and we can stop the us, them stuff, then South Africa has a phenomenal ability. Listen, okay, I've spent a fair bit of time in Germany. Boy, do they know how to get things done. They get stuff done and it works, right? And, recently I've spent a lot of time in Estonia, and I often joke with my friends in Estonia that Estonians are like warm, friendly Germans. They're the same. They're tenacious. And do you know who else is like that? South Africans of all races, powerful, determined, creative, intelligent, and hardworking. You guys, you don't understand. One of the reasons that America's in the trouble they're in is they think the American dream is get a job and sit and play Xbox on the weekends. The work ethic that I see in people in South Africa is inspiring to me. It'd just be really even more inspiring if it was like all working in the same direction.
Eric, on that note, and on that absolute raw for South Africans, we're going to end the interview. What I'd like to do, though, is to ask you, you've got a Speaker Nation masterclass coming up and a Wildfoot masterclass. Do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about them? What we will do for everyone is when we send out the recording to those people who registered, we'll send links to these. But if you just want to say a little bit about those two things before we end, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Influence is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself as a human being. The ability to get your words out well, whether it's in a conversation or in a presentation or in a video or what have you. It is one of the greatest and most valuable skills in the world today. And of all the methods of marketing, nothing is more effective than face-to-face conversation, face-to-face connection. But it's not very leverageable because how many people can you meet in a day? And so the way you can leverage it is by being able to speak to a camera or speak to an audience. And so as somebody who was absolutely terrified of public speaking and not good at it, like I didn't have the skills and I was terrified, I know what a big difference it made in my life to make that transition. And what I've learned, as I said earlier, is that one talk can change so much, not only at this big level, like Mandela can change a country with one talk, Churchill can change a country with one talk, John F. Kennedy could change a country with one talk. As much as that's true, we also can change our entire lives with a single talk. And so many of you that are watching this either live or in the recording, you are one talk away from something. I don't know what it is. It could be a best-selling book in your case, or a new job, or raising money for your company, or a political campaign. I'm hoping some of you are thinking of jumping in there and doing some good in that area. But the point is that many of us are one talk away from a significant breakthrough. And so we're running a masterclass now on exactly that concept of how you put a talk together in the most effective way, how to get your talk designed so you don't need to use notes to deliver it. You can deliver it with confidence and you can deliver it with power. And the masterclass is entirely for free. It's super high value. So I hope you guys will come and join us at the masterclass.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. And Eric, thank you for taking the time out and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us, answering all my questions. It's been a wonderful evening. So thank you from all of us here in the Moyo studio. And thanks to your team for helping to organize it.
Cindy, you are most welcome. Thanks for making it happen. And I'll just put this out to you that I am absolutely sincere in my desire to spend over the next 2-3 years a lot more time in South Africa. The last speaking gig I had to cancel, that was canceled on me right before the lockdown, was to speak for the YPO at the Cradle of Mankind in June, and it ended up getting canceled for lockdown. And I'm putting it out to everybody out there in South Africa. I am really looking for reasons and excuses to come down there and talk about business and talk about health and come back to the old country. So keep your eyes out. Come follow me on Instagram, say hello, and I hope we all get to meet in person one day.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric.